Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Benuck. Well, today we're going to talk about some interesting things. Actually, what I'm planning on talking about today on this show are lightning rods in Bedford. Now, I'm not talking about those things that go up on buildings to deflect lightning from hitting your house or a building in town. I'm talking about the other kind of lightning rods, the ones that make you take notice of something. And that's what lightning rods do, people who are called lightning rods. They make you think about things that maybe you hadn't been thinking about. They bring up things that maybe you didn't even know about, or maybe just heard certain versions of. They bring up subjects sometimes that powers that be might not want them to bring up. That's why I love them. They ask questions that some people would prefer not be asked. Another reason to love them. They don't go away when they don't get answers, but they keep on plotting and keep on asking, and they just don't go away. Even more reason to love them. You know, it takes some courage to be willing to serve as a lightning rod in a community, because people who disagree with you because you're a lightning rod will often resort to ridiculing the lightning rod to either quiet them down, that's what they hope, or to suggest that the person is just nothing more than a rabble-rouser with nothing better to do. People will question their right to speak up by questioning maybe their educational background or their intelligence level. As a matter of fact, if my memory serves me correctly, we saw that just a couple of months ago during the school deliberative session, when somebody who had an idea that some people didn't like was questioned as to what his educational background was, because maybe he wasn't smart enough to be asking those kind of questions when all of the experts already agreed on something. Because they like to kind of think that all decisions should be made by the experts, not by people who don't qualify as one. When you're a lightning rod, sometimes people will just ignore your questions and your comments. They'll say nothing. They will just sit there and totally ignore them. And you know, actually, we see that in Bedford all the time. We see it at both the school committee level and we see it at the town council level, because both of them have this great wording in their procedural rules for their meetings, where during public comment sessions, they do not discuss and they do not answer questions. They sit there and they look at you like this, and not a sound is heard from those elected officials behind the table. Something that absolutely amazes me. And you know, often when you're dealing with people who are considered to be lightning rods, the folks that don't want them there will try to deflect attention away from what they're saying or what they're asking by instead kind of questioning what's the motivation for this person being here. Why are they here? Why are they in front of us asking these things or saying these things? And, you know, one thing that you see all the time is that they repeatedly go on and on about all the great things that are with their idea or their program. They'll talk you to death with all of the wonderful things, all of the benefits, but somehow never ever suggest that there might be a question or a concern or a shortfall, or that maybe somebody objects. I mean, basically, you get talked to death with the good stuff, and you're never allowed to talk about the stuff that maybe needs more talking about. Well, having said all that, we do have lightning rods in Bedford, and I actually have 3 of them with me here today. So I think it's going to be a very, very good show. Now, we don't actually have a script. We didn't agree ahead of time on what we'll talk about. We will be focusing on educational issues, so there'll be plenty of discussion. But these are 3 people, and any of you who follow anything, or for that matter, any of you who are loyal viewers, which I hope all of you are, to Tell It Like It Is, have seen before, because all 3 of them have been on the show before on different subjects. So, my first guest is Marie Banfield, and she is well known to everybody in Bedford as somebody who has a lot to say about educational issues. She's been active for over 10 years. She serves as the education liaison with the Cornerstone Policy Research. And here in Bedford, just some of the recent issues that she's been very vocal on is International Baccalaureate, the Common Core educational standards, the business tax scholarship program, and is one of those folks that people in Bedford certainly do know. My next guest, well, I'm saying next, but they'll all be together, is Richard Evans. Now, Richard Evans is also a longtime education activist. He's a principal of an international consulting firm. He's a book author, former Londonderry School Board member, and he's the author of a warrant article that passed back in the March 10 elections. And then my third guest is none other than Bill Foote, who is a current school board member, a longtime activist on a number of different subjects in Bedford, a former member of the Parks and Recreation Commission here in town, who was known now and then to bring up something that the town council didn't particularly want to hear, and made life fun for those of us who watched all of that. And he's also an engineer. Did I say that? I think I did. Well, in any event, the three of them are here. We're going to hopefully cover lots and lots of topics. I do want to mention, by the way, that when this show was kind of getting put together, I did in fact send an invitation to all school board members, asking them to come on the show individually, not necessarily as part of a group. And so far, I've only heard back from one, and that's the chairman, Terry Wolf. And Terry has indicated that she may come on. But unfortunately, I haven't even gotten an answer from the rest of them. I don't get it. Anyway, welcome to all of you. I'm glad you're here, and I think we're going to have a good show. And I hope you don't mind me calling you lightning rods. But you all have kind of established that reputation, you know, here in town.
Hopefully that's in a good way.
Well, you know, one of the first things I'm going to bring up, because this just was in the papers today, because it actually happened yesterday, that there was a New Hampshire Superior Court decision that the tax credit scholarship program violates the New Hampshire Constitution. And something I believe that even the AG's office sent somebody in to testify was not the case. That's an issue you were very, very much involved in. What do you think about all this? What's happening?
Well, from what I've read, the decision was upheld, or the program is upheld. They struck down one part of it, which means that a parent will not be able to take the awarded scholarship money and go to a religious school with that. So the program still remains intact. A low-income family can apply for a scholarship. They can take that money and they can go to any school, public, charter, private school, even homeschooling, as long as it's not a religious-based school. So that was the decision. My understanding is already being appealed to the Supreme Court in New Hampshire. This decision was made on an amendment in our New Hampshire Constitution, the Blaine Amendment, but that was the decision that came out yesterday as far as I've read it, so I'm hoping I've got that pretty clear.
Now, was the AG's office, when they testified, did they address the religious affiliated schools?
Gosh, I'm trying to remember. That was a couple months ago. You know, I thought that they did a good job, a pretty good job of defending the program. There was the AG's office, and then there were also other attorneys that worked on the case, and I thought they did a great presentation. How the AG's office attacked that particular part of the program, I don't recall exactly. I think Richard was there, so he might remember.
I think actually the argument hinged more actually around the issue of whether the money was in fact state money. I mean, that's usually because the funds for this program come from business tax credits. So if you're a business and you owe $100,000,
but it was never put in the state's hand to begin with.
The state never gets it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so the question becomes, well, the Blaine Amendment says that the state can't fund religious education, which I guess we're going to talk about in a minute anyway. But in this instance, the state's having nothing to do with it. You know, so it's and in fact. I mean, there have been numerous cases around the country where there have been tax credit programs like this, and nobody to this point has found that a tax credit program infringes on because there's Blaine amendments all over. They're not just in New Hampshire, and nobody's really found that tax credit programs infringe on state constitutions. So,
And if I'm not mistaken, several state Supreme Courts did rule, correct?
absolutely,
Right.
yes,
Okay.
yeah. And when it was challenged to the U.S. Supreme Court, it wasn't. They ruled there was no standing in the Arizona case, because Arizona's got a big program. So this one is a long way from done at this point. So.
Well, it seemed as though so much of the argument that I heard, at least, from people was that they were so afraid that it would take money away from the public school systems. And, I mean, I personally thought that was kind of a ludicrous argument because the numbers would never be big enough that it would be taking big chunks of money out of any local school
Yeah, I
system.
mean we're spending $3 billion a year in New Hampshire now. It's the numbers roughly 200,000 kids,
Yeah,
15,000 bucks a kid, and I mean at the moment we're at what, about 170,000 or something dollars has been I mean it's and even fully funded. I mean there's a cap on it that's 3 or 4 million, isn't it? 3 million this year, 5 million next year, out to 3 billion, and of course the kid goes away too. So I mean it's the thing about it is it's kind of strange with the the religious thing. Religion has absolutely nothing to do with this case. I mean, it's convenient for the opponents who don't want school choice, but they don't care about religion. They don't really care about the Constitution. The whole issue is: are we going to continue with a public school monopoly or not? And it's, even though it's small, it's a crack in the wall, and that's what they.
Didn't they fight this hard for charter schools too, or against charter schools?
Didn't they what? Sorry?
They fight that hard against charter schools.
Oh
for the same reason?
yeah, 95. I mean, actually, I was very involved at the beginning of the charter schools in Londonderry. We passed the first. It was called the generic authorization vote, which was the first of several step process at that point. And we passed the first one in 1995 after the charter school legislation was passed, which is 96, 95. They passed the legislation, and. I mean, it was vicious. It was exactly the same. It was exactly the same argument. They were sort of, this is, the sky's falling, and it'll be terrible, and all the money will go away, and it's.
I just know from our perspective too that the head count is actually dropping from year to year. So Bedford is held on for a couple of years only because of Greenfield Farms. I mean, your neighborhood that put us over the top for 800 kid growth over 10 years, where every other district was shrinking. So
That whole subject wasn't even supposed to come up at the school deliberative session. But as we remember, we had, I believe it was 2 residents, decide to lobby against that at the school deliberative session, which I know I had a great deal to say afterwards because it was totally out of bounds, and I thought that the school moderator or somebody should have ended that. Yeah. I don't think we should have had to have listened to a lobbying. But if I'm not mistaken, the school board never really got involved in that issue, correct?
No,
Bedford?
it's a citizen-derived warrant. It's not our purview.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, the school board was not active in saying, "Oh, this is a terrible thing, this scholarship program."
No, the board. For the
scholarship.
For the schools,
Oh,
the scholarship, yeah.
No
Because
opinion.
I mean, it really wouldn't have had that much, if any, impact on Bedford.
Right.
Right.
I mean, maybe somebody would have said, "I want to apply," but. Probably, in all likelihood, probably
No, we
not.
saw the legislation come out through the New Hampshire School Board Association.
Yeah.
They give us a heads up on pertinent regulations and laws that are coming down, but something like that is
yeah, it wasn't something
it's
we
one thing to have
saw.
an opinion, but we have no voice in that
I
race.
didn't think you had ever made a formal statement on it.
I mean,
So the
I'm
next
not-
step will be the state Supreme Court then.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, that'll be interesting. I wonder how long it'll take before it'll actually get heard. Probably months, huh?
It'll be a lot. I think that'll
If
be quite
not-
a long time. Yeah.
if not even longer. Well, I just thought it was worth bringing up only because of the fact it's current news.
Yeah, I think too the decision itself, the amendment, what it's based on needs to be clarified, because what I think we're going to miss is why this judge ruled the way he ruled. And I do believe it will be overturned, because I think the issue will boil down to, is this state funding or not? And Richard brought up the fact that it never comes into the state, so that way it's never distributed. But he did base it on an amendment. He based it on an amendment to the Constitution, which is the Blaine Amendment. And Richard's written about that, and I was hoping that he could kind of explain it pretty quickly, because I think it's important to understand why this decision was made. based on that amendment? And is it really a fair decision? I mean, should we even have this in our Constitution at this time?
Yeah.
So I was hoping he'd explain that.
Yeah, I can give you a little potted history of the Blaine Amendment. And I should probably say, I mean, I'm not religious at all, so I have no axe to grind whatsoever in that regard. But I mean, if you look at it, the Blaine Amendment is a stain on the Constitution. It's I mean, it was born in a time of nativist bigotry, and it doesn't belong there. And if we look back at the history of it, James Blaine was actually, he's somewhat of a forgotten character, but he was a senator, he was in the House, he was twice Secretary of State.
Presidential candidate.
And he was a presidential candidate, and he was actually very influential in the Republican Party. And around about 1875, there was a lot of concern in the Republican Party over this nativist sentiment, particularly in the Northeast, that it was going to split the Republican vote. And Blaine, as one of the leaders of the Republican Party, in an attempt to sort of cement together the vote, offered up this amendment, which subsequently bore his name, in the first of all in the House of Representatives, where it passed, and secondly in the Senate, where it narrowly failed, which was to stop any government money going to religious schools, because they were all worried about the waves of Catholic people coming in, and there was all this nativist bigotry. Very unpleasant. At least by today's standards, I mean, it's disgusting. Anyway, so it didn't happen at the federal level, and all the supporters then fanned out across the country, and they succeeded in getting similar language into 38 of the state constitutions, saying pretty much no government money to religious schools, no how. So the issue now is, you know, people tend to think we hear, oh, we've got to have separation of church and state. That's how we do things. But in fact, I mean, that phrase doesn't actually appear anywhere in either the state constitution or the federal or the U.S. Constitution. And in fact, one of the things that's been most interesting to me, as I've done this for almost 20 years now, school stuff, is learning a bit about First Amendment law. And the thing that everyone has to understand is there's two sides to it. There's the Establishment Clause, and then there's the Free Exercise Clause. And they call the gap between the two is known as the play in the joints in legal terms. And if you interpret one too broadly, you infringe on the other. It's kind of a, you know, my fist and the tip of your nose situation. Now, in terms of the Establishment Clause, now that is actually settled law that voucher schemes do not offend the federal Establishment Clause, the First Amendment. That was settled in 2002 in Zellman versus Simmons-Harris, which was a case from Ohio. However, the language in the state constitutions tends to be stronger. So what's happened now is all the opponents of vouchers are actually using the languages in the state constitutions, which is what's happening here, to try and stop voucher programs. So the question now becomes, well, if we use that language, do we offend the Free Exercise Clause in the U.S. Constitution if we go too broadly? So and this case may well end up in the U.S. Supreme Court, and we may end up knocking over all the Blaine amendments, which would be a good thing. Yeah. Right. So the people who are supporting this are playing with fire a little bit, actually.
Now, meanwhile, can the program still run?
Yes.
It can.
Yes, as far as I know. Yes, but they can't take it to a religious school right now. So that's
which is the problem, really, because
so some of the people who have applied for a scholarship are just automatically going to be out of the scene until this is all settled?
Most of the lower-priced schools that people would go to from a cost point of view are the religious schools. Mm-hmm. So effectively, by saying no to the religious schools, you kind of, you know, you kind of end it.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah,
good point. But I wasn't sure if it meant the whole thing would have to shut down until this was
No. As far as I know, no. I just think that it's important to understand that this decision is basically based on an amendment in our New Hampshire Constitution that is based on religious bigotry. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, my hope, and I think the hope of others, is to appeal or repeal this amendment.
All right.
Because it really, it's something that, you know, back in the 1800s was put into the Constitution based on religious bigotry. It really shouldn't be there anyway. So, you know, if one good thing comes out of that, you know, I think it'll be overturned at the Supreme Court level anyway because of the money issue, where the money's coming in and out of. But at the same time, my hope is this will call attention to this amendment, and maybe we can all work to repeal it anyway.
It's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are following it on both sides of the issue. You and I recently did a show on Common Core.
Yes.
And of course, that remains a very hot topic. Lots of things going on all over the country on it. And I noticed through, you may have sent it to me, that we do have a town right now in New Hampshire, Conway, balking at implementation. And when I kind of did a little research on that today, one of the problems they seem to have with it is they've estimated that it's going to cost them over $127,000 just for teacher training and the equipment that's going to be needed. I don't know if it's been finally solved yet in Michigan, but there was legislation to absolutely prevent the State Department of Education from spending dollars on implementation and such. One of well, we talked about a few things. The fact that the cost is unknown in the state, the privacy issue certainly is big, big, big. The lack of the state standards. I mean, all of these things are all floating around. I've been following the school board to the degree that not physically sitting at meetings, but watching on TV and then reading the minutes and such. Yeah, and I had asked, and I think you're aware of this, and you certainly are, and I know I announced it on the show of Common Core, that I did indeed invite Superintendent Tim Mays, or, if he preferred, Assistant Superintendent McGee, to come on the show, not at the same time, not for debate, but to be able to come on and do their view of Common Core. And I did get an immediate answer that they were not going to, because they were not advocating or fighting Common Core. You know,
well, what it is, it's handed down to us.
Right,
we have no choice in the matter.
Right. But one of the things I did see, and I guess this is where I'm going with this, one of the things that I did see through the minutes, if I were to just excerpt Chip McGee's comments, he seemed like he is favoring a lot of it. I mean, he was saying all kind of positive things in his comments in the minutes. And the other thing that kind of bothered me, and I won't use the word disingenuous because I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but some one of you, I'm not sure if it was you or another board member, brought up the cost. And basically the answer was, well, it's not going to cost anything in Bedford because of the fact we already have budgeted school materials.
No, we already had the infrastructure in place. We have to take the NWAE test, and it uses basically the same thing for the, if I understand correctly, the smarter balance testing, which is kind of very similar to what we already do.
But what about textbooks and teacher training?
Textbooks are rotated in and out, and as time goes by, we'd be aligning more and more with Common Core. I mean, we won't be able to buy textbooks without
most of the
aligning.
cost that some districts are experiencing is the computer, because they take it on the computer.
Technology.
And we have the technological background.
They need a
Now,
lot
do
more
we
computers.
have enough computers for this to be?
We have computers on wheels in every school, and I think what they do is they consolidate them in one place and run the testing. I don't have the logistic, background behind me, but Chip was saying that it doesn't look like it's going to be adding expense to us. But we don't know what the test is going to be like yet, too. We had a trial run last year with the 7th grade just to see how they would turn out. We don't get to see the results, and that's just to see how the kids tolerate it, how we can put the infrastructure together with the equipment that we have, and to see if it works. So that was a dry run. Next year, I guess, is 2015 is when the
Now, one of the things that concerned me, though, is that we had talked at length about the whole issue of privacy and some of the information that is going to be garnered and used. And there was, some mention in the school board minutes at one of the meetings. I don't remember which one it was. But there was some conversation, and Chip did say that he wasn't quite sure how they were going to be used. But I really didn't hear any school board members specifically saying, gee, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like they're going to be collecting a lot, and maybe we should be looking at this. Off the record, outside of school board meetings, is anybody asking questions about this? Because this, to me, seems like it's kind of a big thing.
It's an open-ended question. Nobody has an answer yet because nobody knows what the final thing is going to look like. We have an idea how the testing is going to be done. We have an idea what the content's going to be, but what comes from on high is going to be a surprise to everybody.
But can't the local school board put rules in place in advance, saying, we're not going to give this information, or parents have the right to opt in or out, or what have you?
Well, it spins out of No Child Left Behind waivers.
Yeah.
The federal government has told us we're going to be doing Common Core. So, yeah, I don't have to tell you, but it's...
That all seems to me a little bit sort of hazy, though. You've written once or twice about it. It seems like the...
Well, the Commissioner of Education...
The Commissioner seems to say one thing, and somebody's saying something else.
The Commissioner said that this is all voluntary for schools.
But it's not really.
Well, I think to a certain degree, technically, she's right, but I can also sympathize with the schools because they're forced to use this assessment now. So once you're forced to use this assessment, everything's going to be based on that. Everything's going to be judged on that. So yes, we don't have to do the standards, but you're going to judge us on the standards. You're going to judge us on how well our students do. And if our students don't do well, SB 48, which just passed the House and Senate and is going to probably be signed by the governor, now is going to say that the New Hampshire Department of Education comes in and remediates your school if the students don't perform well on this test. So
that'll fix things.
She says
it's like kneecap on steroids.
Yes, it is. It is.
It's a good way to put it.
Oh.
So you can argue both back and forth and say whether it's voluntary or not. I heard her say voluntary, and then everybody in the room laughed because everybody knows it's really not voluntary.
Yeah.
They're forced into this in many respects. Now, are there things that the school can do? Absolutely. They can develop a policy that says no private information is coming out of the school district without your permission, parents, because the FERPA laws were just eviscerated by President Obama, and this information can get out to anybody now, but the school board is here to protect your children's privacy. That also has to be done at the state level. I think that individual parents need to contact their state legislators and say, look, we have a problem here. That's what they're doing in New York right now. New York developed legislation right now that they proposed protecting student privacy. They've already started with the assessments. We haven't started them yet officially. So the parents are in an uproar right now. The teachers are in an uproar. The principals are in an uproar over this assessment. There are problems with it. There are mistakes on it. There are all kinds of issues with this assessment that is going to be coming to our school. So there are things that the local school board should be looking at. Privacy should absolutely be at the top of the list. Somebody should be, if my kids were in that school, I would be at the school board meeting saying, look, I want this policy developed because I want my child's privacy. Not with the IRS scandal, with the NSA thing going on. Yeah. What more evidence do we need that this information should not be getting out there just to anybody? It can go to any department in the government. It can go to vendors, and a lot of that.
And we don't know where that stops.
We don't know where that stops.
Will eventually go to insurance companies,
yes,
to employers, and so on. I think those are some of the real and existing dangers.
Right. This was done with a memorandum of understanding between the Department of Education and the assessments. So they agreed that this information can now go out. They didn't agree to what could go out. They didn't specify what information will be going out. They just agreed to it. So now that has been put in place, it's really up to parents to start saying, well, we were just thrown under the bus, and now we need to fix this. Unfortunately, that's been part of the problem with Common Core, is all of these strings that are attached. Setting up this longitudinal database came through the stimulus funds, and now all of this information can be leaving. It's important, and we need to do something about it at the local and at the state level.
Now, I do have a question, because I know that under the whole standards or rules or whatever we're calling them as far as how it has to be operated in each state, is it 10 or 15% of the various things the state has the opportunity to say, well, we're not doing that part without penalty. Does that same thing go back down to the local school level as well? Can a local school board have that option of saying we're not going along with 15%?
The state, that's at the state level. As far as I know, see, this is the confusing part, and I sympathize with Bedford because when I watched Chip McGee do his presentation, he was a little unclear. I was a little unclear. I mean, I have to tell you that the schools not having a full understanding of what this all means, I can sympathize with them because the transparency and the information, you know, the school board several years ago, the New Hampshire school board voted this in. And most school board members are now just figuring out that a couple years ago this was voted in for the schools. Mm-hmm. So the information that has been coming to the schools has not been very transparent. It's not very good information. I've listened to the Department of Education on several occasions make presentations to school boards and to legislators, and the lack of information that they have offered has been shocking to me. I mean, I went to the Manchester School Board meeting and listened to somebody from the Department of Education go before the school board, never brought up the privacy issues, never brought it up, never brought up the issue with the standards that there were higher standards in other states that were better than what, what we're getting with Common Core. But they talked about how Common Core was going to get our kids to think critically. And I thought it was interesting because they didn't offer any critical information on Common Core at all to say, you know, here's the good, here's the bad. You know, you guys make the decision.
Well, like I said, this is what goes on.
Yes.
You know, you get overwhelmed with all the good and the benefits, but nobody wants to talk about the problems or the questions.
Right.
And obviously there are some problems. I mean, they're cropping up all over the country, and obviously there are thousands of questions associated with this. And I don't know, I mean, just from what I'm seeing, and again, I'm not trying to damn the school board, because they're probably sitting there scratching their heads like school administrators are. But it doesn't seem as though there's a lot of questions getting asked in Bedford, and I guess that's what's bothering me.
It's rolling from the top. We have to react. We don't determine this policy. It's coming to us. So
I think, though, Bill, you know, one of the things that always bothers me with standards, and you know, I think there's definitely a place for them. Mm-hmm. But what tends to happen in my observations of school districts is when the standards come down, instead of being implemented as a floor and saying, right, we're going to expect this is what everybody should know, but some kids are going to know a heck of a lot more, they implement them as a ceiling.
Yes, absolutely.
And when you get to, okay, now you know how to solve this type of quadratic equation. Okay, you go sit over there and do some coloring while we work with them, because you can't go on and learn the next bit, because that wouldn't be fair. And I think the board does have a role to play there in ensuring that...
You and I have talked about tracking and the impact that something like that would have, but I don't see that happening on the board. The town school boards from several years back went away from that, and I couldn't tell you why. I don't know why you wouldn't want to encourage accelerated kids to accelerate themselves.
I think a lot of school district policy and state policy and federal policy, you know, I mean, the kids start on a pretty wide bell curve of motivations and abilities to start with, and it always seems to me that school board policy, and not just here but elsewhere, is to try and narrow the standard deviation on that curve. And this is one of the things I don't like about the program. The word in it, common.
Yes.
It bothers me. You know, we're trying to make everybody the same. And what I think the policy ought to be is to try and move the whole bell curve to the right. Even if we get wildly different outcomes. Heck, you know, in football we don't have a problem with it. When we do the school play, we don't have a problem with it. Right, we audition for that. I mean, if some kids have got some talents, then let's try. I mean, we can't afford to stop anybody with the world situation that we've got now. The competition that these kids are going to come up against from low-cost labor around the world, we cannot afford to say, right, you know enough, stop. And you know, if Common Core makes sure that all the kids have a reasonable understanding of mathematics, then I'm all for it. But if it stops anybody, then I think it's a disaster.
Now, without trying to like put you in a horrible position.
You can't. Go ahead, try.
No. I mean, do you yourself? I mean, you're at the meetings. You know, you're obviously.
I'm living the dream.
Yeah, living the dream, right? Yeah, during nightmare maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, do you feel as though sitting there? Do you feel as though enough questions are getting asked? I mean, because I, as an observer, just aren't seeing it?
Yeah. I got to say about the Bedford School Board, when I was elected, I thought I would not be getting certain emails, not be getting certain phone calls. That hasn't happened. And I have to think that what I expected to be power blocks operating the school district and me being out by myself, it doesn't exist. There's 5 people on the board, and I think every one of us wants to do what's best for the town of Bedford.
Oh, I agree.
The kids,
I agree.
the
That's
teachers, the
not
administrators, the
issue.
taxpayer,
Yeah.
and we all come at it from a different perspective. So to say that we're not asking questions is probably because we're so deeply immersed in this stuff anyway that we possibly can't avoid it. I don't want to say it's boring, but it's stuff that we see all the time. So it's one of those things where we get the discussion behind the scenes, so that we have maybe a deeper explanation than maybe people that watch, from the floor or from on BCTV. So, I know I go out and read a little more about it, and I'm sure the other members do too. But we come at it from our own perspective.
But maybe knowing her perspective, and I think I can understand where you're coming from. And I think I've talked to other school board members about this before. When somebody's watching, because the questions are going through our head, and you may already have the answer, but maybe as a school board member, even though you may have the answer, it might be beneficial to the viewer to to ask a question. And I think that's a good point. I think that would make the school board even better, because you may have the answer, but somebody watching may have that question and it's not being asked. So maybe as a school board, that would be a great thing to take to the school board and say, this was brought up, and I think it would benefit the people in Bedford if we would ask more questions.
Yeah, it could be done in a positive, not a negative way.
The idea of having a Twitter bar on the meeting, so somebody would Twitter in a question.
Oh.
Hey, why are you doing that? Or what's
That's a great
and
idea.
have it go across the bottom and have simple
But
questions.
you don't get an answer even if you go to the meeting.
Oh no, at public comment. We can't answer you there by policy, but if somebody Twitters something in, we can say, oh, by the way, we didn't explain this well enough, we can go back to it.
Actually, I find that really different. Different school boards operate in different ways. I mean, when I sat on the board in Londonderry, people would come in and clobber me usually.
Well, I think what it was
but there was a lot of dialogue.
Sure.
I got to, just as a sort of general policy, I don't like the fact
it used
that
to be like that in
can't-
Bedford too, where it was pretty freewheeling, but there was a lot of confrontational people versus school board, probably about the late 90s.
Yeah, no, and I can understand that, and I can I can understand the chairman of the school board or the chairman of the council having to set some parameters.
Right.
And I mean, fine, set a time limit, or say, okay, we have a packed agenda, let's talk about it for 3 minutes or something. Or if it gets out of hand, if you have to throw somebody out of the meeting, throw somebody out of the meeting. But it just drives me nuts at these meetings when the elected officials are sitting there like Buddhas, absolutely silent. You don't even know if they're thinking about what they're having for dinner when they go home, or if they're actually listening to the citizen who's asking a question or making a legitimate point.
Yeah, I mean,
or even if they're making a stupid point.
If someone
they
goes
have
along,
the right to do that.
Right.
They're paying the
Right.
bills.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we want to go in and ask a dumb question, then suffer us.
And I mean, the policy, I think, sort of says, well, and it's fair enough. We can't answer all the questions because somebody might come in and ask. Someone needs research.
Exactly.
But the problem that I've got with it is not so much they don't answer there and then, is that they don't answer at all.
At all. Yeah. I mean, just that silence is infuriating.
Yeah, and you write emails and you don't get
I mean,
you don't
even
get
if
a
you said
response
something
and-
like, gee, you took us totally by surprise on this.
We'll tell you
we had
next
no
meeting."
idea you were going to talk about it, and tell you what, the next meeting we'll bring it up, or something. But not just,
Thank you for your input.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, and I mean, again, we don't want a situation where everybody's throwing rotten apples at each other, but I think there needs to be more dialogue. I really do.
I do too. Yep.
And again, maybe because I'm from Massachusetts. I mean, I think I said to you, or was it to you, when we all first were arriving here tonight, if most Massachusetts cities or towns, if somebody showed up and made a public comment and the people did that, they'd probably just jump over the table and grab them by the throat. What do you mean you won't answer me?
Yeah.
And I find it weird. I really do.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, we won't waste time on what I find weird. One of the things we definitely need to talk about, because I know definitely one person in this room has had a look on his face like he might have wanted to jump over the table a couple of times, and that would have been Richard when he brought up Article 10 at school board meetings, and maybe like just real in a couple of sentences for those people who forget what Article 10 is, you can tell them. And I don't know, I sense, and it's not that you've said anything at school board meetings that, you know, could be considered cantankerous, but I've sensed that possibly you were a little frustrated that maybe he wasn't hearing some answers at these meetings. And again, I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot saying that.
It's my opinion, and I can have an opinion, even if the board doesn't vote in the direction that I'd like them to.
True. Okay.
So.
Well, so you want to talk about Article 10? Because I know you've shown up at the last couple of, well, not twice in a row, but you've been at recent school board meetings bringing this up.
Yeah. I see we've got 17 minutes left. I don't think we'll need it all, actually, because it's kind of a short story, because the answer
is that okay. We can jump all over the place.
And that's the problem. You know,
well, first of all, remind people of what it was.
Yeah, Article 10 was a citizens' petition warrant article which appeared on the ballot in March, and its goal was to see if we could set targets in the school district for the kids to pass more of the advanced examinations, either the AP or the IB. With a goal really of aligning
now again, for
things
those people who don't have kids in the school, AP is advanced placement, IB is international baccalaureate.
And that's kind of academically, I mean, you probably have some words.
No, people forget.
If you look at the calculus exam, the questions are about the same, so we'll call them equivalent for now. And the goal was really to sort of see if we could align our performance benchmarks more in line, not necessarily with the state, where there's no question that our kids perform probably top 2, 3, 4 schools in the state, but more in line with what kids overseas might be expected to achieve, where there's much more pressure put on them, and you don't go to college unless you pass 3 or 4 of these things. Only about 40 of our kids out of 300 graduating last year met that benchmark. Well, the history of it was that at the deliberative session, a lady got up and made an amendment because there was a goal of 600 passes. We're passing now 321 last year. And she amended it down to 325. But she committed the cardinal error of not reading to the end of the question, because further down in the text it said that the new goal would be double where we are now. And it said, in the number that she changed, it said at least. So she didn't actually change the intent of the article, even though she meant to. And the article duly passed fairly comfortably at the vote in March. And that's really where the story ends, because despite my going and complaining a few times at the school board, there's only really Bill who thinks that anything should be done about it. And you know, if you're watching, folks, and you voted for Article 10, all I can tell you is that your vote is being systematically ignored by the school board. And if I were you, I would get up and tell them you don't think much about that. They won't answer you if you say it in public comment. But
so basically, you've seen nothing definitive that says this is how we're going to go about doing that.
What happened was, I went. First of all, nothing happened, and then I called Bill and asked if we could get it on an agenda. March 25th it was on the agenda, and at that point I said nothing seems to be happening, and they told me that it would be discussed at a board retreat goal setting meeting on May the 6th. Okay, so I went along on May the 6th, and there was some discussion on goals. The board chair then reluctantly raised, I say reluctant just in a voice, he says, well, I suppose we better talk about Article 10. And immediately several members of the administration started voicing concerns that this was a terrible idea.
What were their concerns?
The high school principal said it was non-inclusive.
Well, explain that. Yeah. What does that mean, non-inclusive?
That only the highest performing kids would be the ones that would be competitive for those tests.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't allowed to speak at all at that meeting, but that really that got me a little bit, because...
I mean, that sounds kind of like wah-wah to me.
Well, don't.
Is
I mean, the point of it is, the whole goal of it
ego
is
going to be hurt if they
raise
don't?
expectations on everybody.
It's to broaden it.
Right.
So I mean, if there's a problem with it being too exclusive, if we broaden it, where are we now? And I mean, for heaven's sake, you know, when we run the football team or the basketball team, we have tryouts. When we do the school play, we do. I mean, to say that we can only do things that are, you know, that everybody is involved with. I mean, that's just not how life is. You know, that's not. So anyway, he said that, and then Cindy Shagnon, board member. She then piped up and says, well, maybe we could do something sort of moderate, like increase 10% a year. And to this day, which is now, I think, about 100 days from the election, that is the only positive suggestion towards implementing what the voters who pay for the schools and send their kids to it asked for at the polls.
Now, since that wasn't on TV, what was the response to her comment?
Immediately, two of the administrators started saying how much that would cost.
Why? If the kids are taking the courses anyway, why would I'm missing something.
Hiring an extra teacher, paying for an extra AP test.
Which it doesn't do, because obviously we've got a certain number of kids taking a certain number of courses. If you take an AP class, you're not taking an algebra class, so it's equally likely to help with class balancing as to make it worse. I mean, it's an absolute red herring, nonsense. But as soon as the two administrators said that, Mrs. Shagnon dropped it like a hot potato. Gone, finished. Which is why I've got this problem, because to me, the board ought to be telling the administration, hey, you know, we've got the people in this town who are paying 62 million for this system and sending their kids, and they recognise that the warrant article was significant, and they want to
it's about a mandate now.
And they want to produce an internationally comparable result. And you board members, you work for them. You don't work for the administrators who say they don't. Obviously, you know, it's human nature. They don't want to be on the hook for a higher standard. Nobody wants that. But you know, we're paying them to do that. And for my money, we ought to be demanding a result. So the long and short of it is you know, I'm pretty cheesed off with what's happening on the.
I picked that up at the last school board meeting. You kind of went in and gave a couple of little jabs there.
Yeah, it just seems to me like we're terrified of saying, okay, let's aim high in case we don't get there. You know, well, if we aim high and we don't get there, we can regroup, figure out why we didn't. But to say, oh, let's just stay where we are because we're fantastic. I mean, there's no question. We're passing 3 times the number of exams that is average in the state of New Hampshire. Now, the College Board who administer the AP, they don't actually produce results, print results by community. So we can't say that we're the best, but we must be right if we're 3 times the average, we're right at the top. But in order to go to college in Europe, you have to pass 3 or 4 of these exams. We're way, way below that. So the question isn't are we good for New Hampshire? The question is that the right yardstick? And personally, I mean, I'm convinced that the kids can do it. I'm convinced that the teachers can do it. I'm convinced that we've got the facility to do it. It just needs leadership. And incidentally, if we did decide to do it, I think everybody would have a good time doing it, because I mean, you know, from just as I do, Bill, from business, there's nothing worse than working somewhere where you're trying to defend turf. And it's exciting if you're in a business that's trying to get better and better. And I think the teachers would you know, if we can get the families to prioritize education more, which they would have to. I mean, it'd be harder work for the kids, there's no question about this. But if we get the whole community into this, oh, how many did we pass this year? I think it could be fun for everybody. I don't think it's a threatening thing. Yeah. And there's no question that it will, I mean, it changes lives. And passing AP Calculus is a life-altering achievement for a teenager, and I just think it's really sad that we seem to be scared of setting a higher bar. You know, and that's.
What do you think the status is now with the school board?
Well, I've told them. I'll tell you. I don't understand the reticence with just telling Richard. Yes, we can. You know, it's not hard for the 5 of us to say it. I've said it. I don't have any doubt that we can't accomplish it. I think what we're doing now is that we're going to be gathering data over the summer, and then in August and September come up with some kind of plan that basically emulates Article 10, even if it doesn't ever come out to tell Richard, yes, we can. So I don't understand the reluctance. I think this is, it's simple. It's direct. There shouldn't really be any means or any need to push back on it. And I don't think there's fear about expecting more, or trying to defend turf. I'm not sure what the thinking is. But when Article 10 passed, it was an obvious yes. I mean, how can anybody resist it?
I mean, for one thing, if you read the mission statement of the schools district, and I have to get the words exactly right here, but it talks about the highest priority of the school district is to achieve constantly improving standards. I mean, Article 10 was should have been welcomed with open arms,
yes.
shouldn't it? This is a community supporting the mission. We're saying yes, let's do it. And now the school districts say, oh no.
I don't think they're saying no. I think they're saying we're doing it our way, and I think that's what the August, September data is going to try and demonstrate, that we have a means to drive towards those goals. Well, maybe if it isn't, per doubling a number, just we're going to see what we can do.
And I believe Nashua had taken that on as a goal. Did they not? To increase?
They did.
No, I think they promoted AP.
They did it on their own.
Now, did Bedford, or has anyone in Bedford talked with them in Nashua? To get ideas or hear what they did, or?
Actually, there was a nice article in the
or?
Nashua Telegraph about it. I mean, that's I think Richard turned me on to it. It was pretty eye-opening. But I think it was just self-directed people set out trying to accomplish something. And I think Article 10 has that same incentive to have us do it. And I think, well, Tim sent you that email talking about how we try and continue to improve anyway. So it's not like it's something that we're trying to ignore.
But I mean, rather than reinvent the wheel, wouldn't it be helpful?
Well, I think Richard's article about doubling what we have it's very simple. How we get there, it can be done any number of different ways. It's not a question of we have to do it. We have to double it like tomorrow. We don't.
I didn't know about Nashua when I started Article 10, and then I think actually you sent me the article originally.
Yeah,
right. That was well after Article 10 passed.
But they've gone up 300% in a decade.
Sure.
And they're actually, they pass, because they're a bigger district, they actually pass quite a lot. I mean, it's surprising, I think, to a lot of people in Bedford, but the kids in Nashua pass a lot more exams total than our kids. Per student, they're just slightly below. But cost-wise, if you take dollars spent per AP exam, you divide the AP exams into, they're a lot more cost-effective in terms of developing intellectual capital per dollar than we are. And you think, gosh, if Nashua can do it, can't we? Right. Really? It just seems that it just needs someone to take it by the scruff of the neck and say, charge. And everybody's life would be better.
And I think what Richard exposed through all of this, and through Nashua's example, is that this should not be coming from him. This should be done in the school. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't have parents and people in the community saying, debating this at a deliberative session. He shouldn't have to put himself in that position. This should be something, in my opinion, that the school administrator should be conveying to the school board. This is our plan. This is what we plan to do. The school board then conveying it to the community that, here's our goals. If the principal is concerned that this is too inclusive, well, you know what? We're not only going to look at the AP and IB kids, we're also going to look at the other kids and raise the bar for them too. I think what my concern watching this all unfold was the fact that we had to have somebody from the community put it on a ballot. This is something that should be a priority of this administration, of this school board, of the parents, not somebody having to put it on a ballot and vote for it. The fact that the vote came out in favor of it didn't surprise me, because I think it's a no-brainer. This makes sense. Of course parents are going to support something like this, because who doesn't want to support raising the bar? There were a few people at the deliberative session who didn't want to raise their bar, and I really have no idea how
that surprised me.
That
night.
Shocked me.
Yeah.
I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked, because I couldn't make it. I was homesick, and watching it, I couldn't believe somebody actually got up and said, "No, we want to lower that bar back down."
Well, somebody was all set to kind of pillory him.
Yeah, exactly, and. To me, even if the bar's too high, because I looked at it and I thought, I don't know if this bar's too high. Mm-hmm. Let the board, let the school decide. You know what, Richard? This is a great suggestion. we might not be able to get there in a year, but we could probably get there in maybe 5 years. So let's give this 5 years. But you know what? This is a great goal. We're going to do what we can, and and if they don't reach that goal, I mean, anybody who works for a company understands that sometimes you put the bar too high, and you don't always get there. And you know what? God bless them for at least trying.
But Cindy's thought, I mean, 10%, that gets us compounded up, that's 7 years doubling, so we'd be right there. What on God's green earth could be wrong with that?
Right. I mean, it's reasonable. I thank her for at least putting something on the table, at least putting something out there and saying, okay, if this is a goal, work it so it is a reasonable goal. If this is too high, make it a reasonable goal. Or maybe this is a good goal, but it can be done in this many years.
If we start. Right. I mean, and we find that's too much, then we come out. Or if we exceed it, we could go. Maybe we can do it 5 years rather than 7. But I think the thing to do is, if we can change the tone in town, so that people are sitting up thinking, oh goodness, this is something that I really need to do for the kids, because it's tough out there now. I have 2 kids that have just graduated college, and a BA is no guarantee anymore. But if you get some of these AP and IB exams under your belt, you take a different trajectory through college, and you come out far more. You can come out far more marketable than otherwise. And they need these skills today, because have you heard of the 22-22-22 job? That's what the new graduates talk about. You're 22 years old.
Oh yeah.
They expect you to work 22 hours a day for $22,000 a year. There's a lot of that out there.
There is.
And the kids they've got to sort of differentiate themselves from the crowd, and the way all the kids who are doing the maths and the sciences and the business and the finance, my experience anyway, I'm sure there's exceptions, but my experience is they're all finding there's good jobs out there, with the Morgan Stanleys and the Merrill Lynches and the consulting companies, but it's tough, for some of the other kids.
Well, believe it or not, we are in the time zone now where I have to start looking at seconds. You're the school board member. Tell me this. Do you think that you hear enough from people, or would you like it if they're lined up at the session each meeting?
Line up. Yeah, we have almost no public comment. Richard has dominated our public comment for the last 2 meetings. Public comment of 1. So anyway, that's one reason why I'm here, is because one of our goals is to increase our public outreach. And if this is public outreach, then I guess I'm fulfilling one of the goals. But we can have other board members come too.
Well, public outreach, but is one of the goals to get more public inreach.
Sure.
To the school board, to the school administration.
Sure.
Yeah? So. Well, I hope so. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you came.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I hope you didn't feel as though you were kind of the one that everybody was going to be attacking or something.
No.
Today.
Come on, guys, let's go.
Yeah.
No.
One of the things I did neglect to bring up when we were talking about Common Core, and you'll have just about enough time to say it fast, September 17th is going to be a great big huge forum in Manchester on Common Core.
We found out that we did not get St. A's for the Institute of Politics that night, so that date may change. We're looking at right around September 17th, but I will do an outreach with the date, but we're going to have a Common Core forum. Professor Sandra Stotsky, who sat on the validation committee, is one who has agreed to come. And Emmett McGroarty from American Principles Project, and Jamie Gass from Pioneer Institute in Massachusetts, who understands Massachusetts standards.
That sounds good. You got it in, because we are right on the wire. Well, for those of you who didn't know what this show would be about today, I think you saw that we covered some ground, and I think you saw that each of these 3 people have served as lightning rods in town, and thank God for that, because we need more of them, which is one of the reasons I threw that question at Bill at the end. A lightning rod does bring up things that need to be talked about, that need to be examined more, and all 3 of these folks have done that, and in my point of view, they tell it like it is, which is what we're all about here. So until the next time, we'll all be back. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.